Welcome to No Rules Review with your host, Ethan Millay.
Hi, Ethan Millay here with another No Rules Review. Today we're going to be looking at Cuba Libre, or Cuba Libre if you're saying it correctly, by Volker Runke and Jeff Grossman. Cuba Libre is the second in GMT's Coin series of games, Coin being an abbreviation for counterinsurgency. And I know many of you right now are thinking, a war game. Give this one a chance. Give the Coin series a chance, because even though this is a war game in clothing, it's really not. It's an area control game. It is a divergent path to victory games. Let me tell you more about it. So Cuba Libre finds 4 players, though it can be played from 1 to 4 with a varying amount of computerized opponents, taking on the roles of different factions during Fidel Castro's Cuban Revolution. One player can play the Bautista government. One player plays the 26th of July movement that Fidel Castro led. One player plays the DR rebels, which was the sort of student and expatriate revolutionary forces, and one player plays the syndicate. They play the mobsters, basically. What makes this and the other Coin games so interesting is that each player has their own goal to fulfill. Each player has its own victory conditions that vary wildly from the other 3. Each player has its own means of acting on the board that vary wildly from the other 3. And in each Coin game, you find that the 4 factions are sort of paired off, and yet they're not in an alliance. So in this game, the government and the mobsters sort of work together, and the 2 revolutionary guerrilla groups sort of work together, but they do not win together. They win on their own. So when you play these games, it becomes a balance between you and your partner only because you have nobody else to work with and everybody else on the table, trying to decide how long you cooperate and when you do decide to finally turn your back on that person you've been working with and strike out for victory. Now, this has led some to criticize that Cuba Libre, and the other Coin series of games, has a bash the leader problem. Yes and no is what I'd say to that. It is obvious, or if players are good, it is obvious who is close to their victory threshold because it is on your player aid and is sometimes marked on the board depending on which Coin series game you have. So you can see if somebody's about to win. Now, you don't know when they are because the opportunities to win, the scoring rounds, are randomly dispersed in the deck. So you should be keeping track of how many cards have been played, understand whether there's a possibility that there's going to be a scoring round coming up or whether it's not probable. But a good player sets themselves up in such a situation where there's not much the other players can do to prevent their victory. So this usually means you're not going to win in the first scoring round or the second or the third. You usually will play to the end of the game, and then somebody set themselves up in such a situation that there really is no stopping them. And honestly, that's what you would want. You don't want it to be that somebody just happened to sneak through a victory and nobody saw it coming. Now, beyond the gameplay, beyond the dynamics that these games produce, one reason that I do really, really enjoy these Coin series of games is the history. As an engineer, I didn't take too many history courses in college, but when I was back in grade school, history was my favorite subject. I loved learning about, obviously, historical events, and these Coin games do such a good job of it. Before I got this game, I knew practically nothing about the Cuban Revolution. I knew there was a U.S.-backed government. I knew the Castros rose up against it. I knew they won. That was it. But in this game, every card, every round that you play has, an event on it or some story to it. And the rule book, has the history behind all these things. And when you play it, you begin to understand, as is true with most historical and political events, it's not very black and white. You see the Bautista government as this horrible, human rights violating monstrosity that the U.S. is initially supporting, but as the game progresses, the U.S. actually pulls back its support, severely limiting what the government can do and dropping its funding. The 2 revolutionary groups, you realize they both want to overthrow this horrible dictatorship, but both of them have very different ideas of how to do it and what the post-Batista Cuba should look like. And then you get the syndicate, which honestly doesn't really care as long as they're making money. And you see why that would prop up the government, because the government turns a blind eye to what the syndicate is doing. So they are great. They put you in perspective that you might not normally take when you learn about these events. And I mean, I know this one and the Afghanistan one are very adamant to point out that they're not casting judgment, they're not saying anybody's right or wrong, because, you know, it's one of those things, you realize that many people are wrong, that many wrongs were committed. There were good people on both sides, there were bad people on both sides, but that makes a great game. It is a wonderful game when you can have an experience that you share with friends that not only can you enjoy while you're playing it, but then afterwards it opens up this avenue for discussion about things. You know, you certainly won't look at the history of Cuba the same way. I mean, if you know it well, obviously you would look at it the same, but if you're like me and hadn't been all that too familiar with it, this will really change how you look at the entirety of the 20th century with Cuba, and especially U.S.-Cuban relations. Now, another neat thing, I mentioned cards earlier. In these coin games, every card has an event, and the different players are put in order at the top of the event, and only 2 factions can act every turn, which is another thing that sort of pushes in that forced partnership, because since only 2 factions can take an action every turn, you sort of want to have it be there's never a turn where you're not acting. So you want to have somebody who, in the way the cards are shuffled out, tends to be acting when you're not, so they can sort of look after you and you look after them. Or maybe you want it to be that when you two are together on a card, it's a big 1-2 punch, and the other players have to then try to recover from that on their turn. It's very neat. This is probably the easiest of the coin series games. I have, what do they have, 6 volumes now? I have everything but the first one. I do not have Andean Abyss. This, I would say, is the easiest. So if you haven't played a coin game, but you're looking to get into it, I will throw my hat into the ring like many others have and say Cuba Libre is definitely the easiest. Do not be scared off by the thought of war game. This is not the typical war game. This is something that anybody who plays Euro games can play and would probably greatly enjoy. I highly, highly recommend Cuba Libre by GMT Games, Volko Runke, and Jeff Grossman. This has been Ethan Lay with another No Rules review. If you liked what you saw today, share, like, comment below, subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye now.
This has been another No Rules review by Ethan Malay. If you enjoyed this video, consider sharing, commenting, liking, and most importantly, subscribing. For this and other great games, join us over on BoardGameGeek.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.